Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast, everybody. Will Brinson, he is out this week, which isn't a huge surprise. He takes a lot of vacations in the summertime. But the All 32 continues. It's me, Ryan Wilson, filling in for Will Brinson. And today we have fan house legend, my former coworker from back in the day, Steph Stradley, who covers the Texans for the Houston Chronicle. Steph, how are you doing?
I am doing well.
This is bonkers. Like I've talked to someone else. I can't remember who it is now. That was a fan house alum, and that started back in '06. That's crazy that if we're being honest, we basically invented sports interneting. I feel like.
Well, I think that there was like four of us that were from the start to the end.
Yeah, Michael David Smith was an OG. Steph was an OG. I was there. I don't know who the fourth one was, but I'm sure they're doing well wherever they are.
I'm sure.
And they'll let us know. But so quickly tell us your history, because you grew up in Texas, I believe. You live in Houston. How have you been a Texans fan since the start? And before that, what was your allegiance to?
Yeah, I actually moved here in high school. And so this was the first city that I lived in that had a team. And I happened to move here, dating myself, in the middle of Love You Blue. So, Earl Campbell, all that, the Houston Oilers are, no longer, they are gone. That was a bad time in Houston history. And I never thought we were going to get a team back. They got a team back. And I decided that if we ever got NFL football back, I would not take it for granted. And so I didn't. And then I started writing about the team mostly because back in the day, the only place you could get information about football teams that sucked was on message boards. So I was, hung out on message boards. And after the very sorry 2005 season, I couldn't find any good information about the new coach, all this stuff. And they didn't have a Texans blog for the Chronicle, but they had a good Astros one. So I said, hey, I can do this, and been doing it ever since.
Yeah, it's awesome. And you are legitimately invested in Texas and the Texans as a team, sort of the whole experience. I know you're a season ticket holder, and you live and breathe Texans football. So appreciate you joining us. So let's start here. DeAndre Hopkins is gone. I don't think a lot of Texans fans are super pumped about that. So what would this offense look like with Bill O'Brien? Let me just say this. Bill O'Brien, I think, and we've talked about this on this podcast with Brinson and John Breach and Sean McGuff, we give Bill O'Brien a hard time, but he wins football games. I think the issue is it's hard to separate Bill O'Brien, the coach, from Bill O'Brien, the general manager. So what does the loss of DeAndre Hopkins mean for this offense, and what's Bill O'Brien's plan in a post-Hopkins world?
Well, I think arguably, Hopkins was the best player on the offense and had been the best player on the offense for a while. Like, he is the easy button. He was getting a large percentage of the offense targets. And frankly, that is not the trend in the modern NFL. But part of that was, for example, last year, he was one of the few players that had, wide receivers that had functional hamstrings, and you just traded that guy away. And unfortunately, what the risk factors of hamstring injuries are you a fast person, and have you had hamstring injuries in the past? So I think they're just kind of hoping that this player, DeAndre Hopkins, who missed very little time on the field, that he goes away and then magically everybody else who's on the team is healthy. And the idea is, their offense will be like, what they want it to be, which is, instead of forcing the ball to the player that is the best player, they move the ball around to what the matchups say the ball should go to.
So what was your initial reaction when you saw the headline, presumably on Twitter, that DeAndre Hopkins was gone? Because I think the chronology was, hey, the Texans traded for David Johnson. That's interesting. And then the punchline was, oh, and they also traded DeAndre Hopkins. Well, how was that roller coaster, the 15 minutes for you?
Well, it's kind of complicated because there's the issues of them as players, and then there's the issues of the business of the NFL. Like, for example, before all this happened, everybody was thinking, oh, well, they might have to do a Brock deal. Arizona might have to do a Brock deal to get rid of David Johnson's contract, that they might have to give away a pick to induce somebody to take this contract of a player that's been injured and hasn't been performing well. I mean, in the modern NFL, people who pay a lot for a running back usually regret it because, the average running back is pretty good running back compared to whatever the running back that you overpay for. Because the modern NFL tends to be a passing NFL. So, but all that aside, this all happened when the world seemed to be coming to an end. Like, we had already had the coronavirus shutdowns. At the moment it was announced, I had coronavirus. So I wasn't feeling particularly great at that moment. And so, yeah, like, okay, you just got rid of the best player that gets 40% of your targets. You just took on this contract of a player that in the modern NFL, you don't take running back contracts of somebody like that. And they've never had a good offense the whole time that Bill O'Brien has been running the team. Like, when you bring on somebody who's supposed to be an offensive-minded head coach, you would think that you would find that show up in your offensive stats. And like, from an efficiency standpoint, they have been a terrible offense. Terrible offense. Now, part of that is for some of that time, they could depend on their defense being good. And that's gone on the wayside. So the weight of the world is on Deshaun Watson. That's where the Texans are right now.
And so let me ask you this. Is this offense better today than it was 5 months ago? Deshaun Watson clearly is the best player on this offense, but is David Johnson going to be able to look like David Johnson we saw a few years ago, or is he washed? We know DeAndre Hopkins is gone. Can guys like Randall Cobb and Brandon Cooks step up? How do you feel about this offense now compared to say December or January?
I have to say that if you just have a whole bunch of years of terrible offenses, just offenses that you can't depend on other than Deshaun Watson doing miracle stuff, it's hard to have like a higher level of optimism for it. Like, and this isn't the most ideal season to getting, good chemistry with a bunch of new players. And theoretically, this is supposed to be an offense that's similar to, what he ran in New England, with no Tom Brady, of course. And even New England has had issues over the years in incorporating new wide receivers, because there's certain obligations that those wide receivers are supposed to have. And if you are truly going to be a matchup offense where you're taking advantage of what the defense's weaknesses are, then, you need to have some level of chemistry. And I don't know if they're going to be able to have it. Like, I don't feel great taking the worst player off your team and getting a bunch of players that maybe we would be happy about it if this was 3 years ago. Like, this is the 3 years ago offseason when you're adding Brandon Cooks, Randall Cobb, and David Johnson.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And it's worth noting you're pretty optimistic. So for you to, not be super overflowing with praise, I think is telling. So
I don't really think of it as optimism or pessimism, because I think that tends to be kind of an egocentric term where, like, here's where I stand on things, and anything that's different than what I think offensively or defensively, that's, optimism or pessimism. I just think that, fans generally want some realism. And we now know enough of Bill O'Brien to go, it is magical thinking to think that all of a sudden with these changes, everything's better. And that, like, now he has the offense that he wants. Everything's going to be better. Now, the flip side of that is even though the weight of the world is on Deshaun Watson, he is a remarkable human being. Like, he's a remarkable player, but he's also a remarkable human being as far as he elevates the people around him. And there is nothing that he personally can do that could surprise me anymore, because he's already done, in the short period of time that he's been with the Texans, he's already done things that I haven't seen on a football field. And he does it during practice, but he especially does it, like, his best moments are during games where the play breaks down and he throws a touchdown with one eye, his helmet spins around. He can't see what's happening. He thinks his eye might have been poked out, and he throws a touchdown pass. Or it looks like two defenders are about to kill him. He spins out and runs away. I mean, he is the best person on this offense, and the offense is going to completely depend on him. And part of Bill O'Brien being named the GM is not necessarily that things are different than they were in the past. Part of that, as I understand it from what I hear, is putting the responsibility on him. That there is one person who's responsible for this being put together. Like, the buck stops with him now. Like, there isn't, because there was a legitimate question about whether GMs in the past were putting a roster together that was more, hey, let's develop these guys. And in the meantime, you're wasting the talent of the guys that you already have.
Right.
Like, it's clear that Bill O'Brien wants players that are good players that know how to play. And, whatever you can say about them, Randall Cobb, Brandon Cooks, Kenny Stills, players that he added, are players that know how to play. Laramie Tunsil knows how to play. Like, you're not developing a guy. And so they're still developing people, but he's getting a more veteran cast. And I think for many years, the way that the Texans were, they had older players that were too old and too young and not enough guys in the middle. So, like, now he's responsible for what this roster is. And the roster composition has been a problem for many years.
Yeah, I think a lot of people echo exactly what you just said there, Steph. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to talk more Texans. All right, Steph, we talked about the offense a little bit, and you laid out your thoughts about Deshaun Watson's importance. And I mean, he could arguably be one of the most important players to his team of any team in the NFL. But let's talk about the other side of the ball, where another really important player in Texans history has struggled with injuries in recent years. J.J. Watt said he's not eyeing a new contract extension. We talked about the injuries there. He has two brothers playing in Pittsburgh. Do you think he'll end his career in Houston, or will they? I was talking to the Steelers beat reporter last week, Jim Wexell, for Steel City Insider, and he loves the idea of J.J. Watt coming there. I'm sure you're less thrilled about it, but what are your feelings on J.J. Watt in terms of where he ends his career, and even when that may happen? Because I think he's 31 right now.
Yeah, for the type of position he plays, he could play for a while. And, the only limitations to him is his own desire to play. And I don't think that he wants to play where he doesn't have a chance to win, or that he's playing at a high level. Now, he recently said he wants to retire a Houston Texan. I'm not sure why he would particularly want to go to the Steelers, given their quarterback situation, because he's already been familiar enough with the situation where the quarterback position is in flux. And I'm not just saying that to kind of dig on you, Ryan, but I am.
That's disrespectful to TJ and Derek. That's what that is.
But I mean, I think I would never bet against J.J. Watt. Like, the only things that have hindered him are, just his personal health. Now, he's had various things that he's dealt with, but I mean, I think he's trying to work smarter. I think the biggest issue that he has is he's the best player on the defense, and it's not even close. And, the Texans haven't had draft picks because they had to, they didn't have to. They got rid of a number of draft picks to get to help their offense, which needed help. But in the meantime, their defense has issues. And, the biggest problem that they had last year, and I don't think, given their current roster, it's solved, is it didn't matter how great Deshaun Watson played. If your opposing quarterback has the same quarterback rating as Deshaun Watson or better because your defense is bad, you're going to have a hard time every week. And when you play legitimately good quarterbacks, you're doomed. Like I know people were upset about the playoff loss against Kansas City after having such a big lead at the beginning, but I'm like, Kansas City has a good scheme on offense. The Texans do not. And they didn't have a defense that could go toe-to-toe with a healthy Kansas City team. And so that's going to be their problem. I don't see how their offseason changes do one thing to help their defense at all.
It's funny you mention that because our buddies at Football Outsiders ranked the Texans defense last year 26th overall. And then you mentioned the offseason. In terms of free agency, I don't think they did anything noteworthy in terms of
not yet.
In terms of bolstering the defense, not yet. And then in the draft, they got Ross Blacklock, who I liked a lot, and Jonathan Bernard, an edge rusher, in the second and third round. And then John Reed, a day three cornerback, who a lot of people like, including our producer Debo, who's a Penn State guy. But I think your overall point is one that is that going to magically fix this defense that was bottom third? And I don't think it is. So if there's a specific position group on defense that you're most concerned about, that you would love to see see them step up, and maybe that affects the overall productivity of this defense, is there one that sticks out to you?
Well, I mean, I'd like to feel more comfortable about the secondary, but I don't, that's not a position that you can go to Costco and go, I actually like to get a good cornerback here. I don't feel comfortable with them at defensive line, but they already got rid of JD Clowney. I mean, he's available now. That would be funny. That would be fun to get JD Clowney back, but he actually wants a decent contract, and he's a player that is really difficult to value because he's unique with both his injury history background and that he's a disruptive defensive lineman, but he's not a great pass rusher.
Right.
Like a traditional pass rusher. Like, he disrupts the quarterback a lot, but he's not getting the sack totals that you normally get if you want to have a top of the league salary.
So let's take a broader overarching view of the organization. According to Vegas, they're plus 300 to win the AFC South, which is third best in the division. And more importantly, their win total is set at 8. So in your mind, what feels like the ceiling for this team in terms of wins, and what's the floor based on what we just talked about?
Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the AFC South is not a division that you should rely on as like, oh, this is the gangbuster division that's going to have the great team come out of it. Bill O'Brien has done very good within the division, and I think part of that is and it's a plus on him. He is a scrappy guy. He is going to find any way to win based on the team that he has on the field. So if he's having issues with the team, he doesn't mind running the ball over and over again just to eat up time because he knows his defense is terrible and he wants to keep them off the field. So like, he'll do what he can to win. But I just don't. I think that the Houston Texans are going to be all about how much can Deshaun Watson carry the team. The end.
So, do you want to give us a number? Like, if this team wins 7 games, that feels like a disappointment. If this team wins 11 games, that would feel like it's huge, right?
Well, in some ways, in Houston, everybody's in massive disappointment with the team. Like, first of all, people are not happy with Bill O'Brien because his style of play is boring, that they feel like he's wasted players' careers. Like, Deshaun Watson, when he first came in the league, he was, throwing the ball down the field, lots of points and all that. He gets hurt, comes back. Everybody's like, oh, Deshaun Watson's going to be great. And then they're playing him as though he has to, hand off the ball all the time. Like hand off the ball, and then him having to do a miracle for third down. Like, so right. People are, at some point you get sick of a particular coach. Now he's GM, which that doesn't make people particularly happy with that. And they're trustworthy because, people in Houston are used to having good GMs running their other teams and have had good results with that. And so, it's a very specialized world and, they're not happy with that. And now for a certain segment of the fan base, they're not happy with the social issues where, Bill O'Brien has said that he is going to kneel with the anthem.
Right.
And some fans in this part of the world are not good with it. And other fans are, but even the fans that are good with his stance are not good with him as a coach or a GM. So it's, it's almost like you're waiting for whatever comes next. Like, oh, you didn't hire a GM because then you'd have to fire that guy too. Like that's the very cynical view of it.
Yeah, Bill O'Brien, and by the way, Steph, we call him Bill O'Brinson on this show because he reminds us a lot of Brinson in terms of decision making. But he's a very so feel free to use that. He's very complicated in terms of the things he does, and you're right. There are sides of him that you like, and there's sides of him that you just can't make sense of. And I don't know if anyone agrees with all three sides of Bill. I almost called him Bill O'Brinson, Bill O'Brien, the coach, the GM, and the advocate for black players. So that is an interesting story. I wanted to ask you, and you mentioned earlier that you actually had COVID back in the spring. First of all, how are you doing?
I am great. I've had a physical. My blood work's good. Knock on wood. I think I'm cool.
And second of all, we heard the other day that some Cowboys players had been diagnosed with COVID, among them Zeke Elliott, who I think is asymptomatic. What are your thoughts on what the stadium situation could look like, what the NFL season could look like? You're a season ticket holder. Now that you've had it, you have the antibodies. But if someone who hasn't had COVID, what would your thoughts be on going to a stadium that maybe holds 60,000 people, but instead only 20,000 people would be allowed to watch that game? Is that something that you're behind, or are you cautious about that? What are your thoughts after having the actual COVID-19?
Well, when all of these discussions were happening, when they were shutting things down in March, as I was having it, I mean, I got it from traveling. Like I was traveling to a hot spot or in a hot spot. But the funny thing about hot spots and COVID is at the time that you're in the hot spot, you probably don't know that it is one. Like you find out 3 weeks later or 2 weeks later if you're lucky. And fans aside, just having people interact together, even if they're hand washing and even if they're being careful, I don't know how they do it. Like I'm pretty careful about that sort of thing because, I've taken care of people who were immune compromised. So when I was traveling, I was hand washing, I was keeping my distance from people. I wasn't going out a lot. I went out a few times and I flew in a plane and I got it. I gave it to my husband. I mean, it's insidious. And the thing is, everybody's symptoms are different. There's asymptomatic people. There's people that spread it before they show symptoms. And then the symptoms are all over the place. Like as people are saying, let's like, for example, my situation, I had extreme exhaustion for 3 weeks, like the kind of exhaustion that you can't stay awake and you're wondering if you're just not going to wake up again, which is a pretty serious feeling. I've never this made flu feel like nothing. Okay. So how do you have a season if 5 offensive linemen all get sick at the same time? Or, you're, in the age of COVID, does it make sense to have your GM and your coach be the same person? The Texans actually, the Texans have some COVID positive players. We don't know which ones those are right now. And, is it an advantage if you have the antibodies early? Now, I've been told by my doctor that just because you've had the antibodies doesn't mean that you're immune, that it could be 2 months, 6 months, 2 years. Fauci says forever. And please, for the sake of all of us, I hope he's correct with that.
Right.
But I don't see how in a stadium situation, even if you had people separated, for example, how you go in and out of the building, how you go through security, how you go to the bathrooms and keep things clean. Like, as much as we want these things to happen, unless we get better treatments and cures very soon, I just think that it would be very difficult. And we have to have faster testing. So, from the time that you think you might have it to the time that you're not exposing a lot of other people.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think I a lot of times I like to give the NFL a hard time, especially Roger Goodell, about the way they've handled things. But I think they've done the best they could, or close to that, based on what we've known, and they seem to have a plan, and they also have the flexibility to understand that this plan could change because things are so fluid. We'll see what happens. So we're mid-June as we talk about this.
Yeah. And you have to plan, like I think for everyone, no matter what your job is, you have to plan as though cures will happen and things can, we'll get better understandings and all that. But you also have to plan that if this is just logistically not feasible, no matter how much people want it or how much money's involved, then sometimes you just have to pull the plug. And we just don't know. I mean, we're in Brave New World. We don't know how any of this is going to go. All I can tell people just generally is wear a mask,
wash your hands.
Really, and wash your hands and try to reduce the spread, because the more control we have on things, the more we'll be able to do. And it's really hard to thread the needle between people's health and getting on with life, because you have to.
And by the way, if you're one of these people that don't like to wear a mask, I include myself in that category. Here's the great thing about wearing a mask. I have to talk to no one when I go to the grocery store, because they don't recognize me as a neighbor or friend, not because I'm, incredibly famous, but it minimizes your contact with people, which is the exact world I want to live in, where I don't have to talk to anybody.
Well, and my deal is I've always had those buff neck gaiters that I wear hiking.
Yeah.
So I've just pulled those out and they're fine.
Yeah. And in fact, that's much cooler than wearing a mask. So if that's your thing, just get one of those things. There you go.
Well, I feel like I'm robbing a bank all the time or doing a heist. So I'm feeling very cool.
Fun fact, bank robbers have the lowest case of COVID because they wear the mask. There you go. Makes sense to be a bank robber. I made that up. Steph, thank you so much. It was great talking to you. Let's not let it be another decade before we actually talk to each other over anything than Twitter or email. I'm glad you're doing well.
Thank you.
And hopefully the Texans have the type of recovery you had from COVID, because I think they're going to need it.
Yes.
So you can read Steph's stuff at the Houston Chronicle. You can follow her on Twitter at Steph Stradley. Steph, great talk.
Anytime.